Turning now to other news that we're following around the world, the United Nations Security Council wrapped up its emergency session just a few hours ago, and Russia called the meeting after blaming the United States for a coalition airstrike, a strike that killed dozens of Syrian troops in an eastern province. Australia also now saying its aircraft were involved in that attack.
And the United States has said that strike was a mistake and they apologized for it and that they had stopped it immediately after Russian officials informed them of their error. They thought they were going after ISIS. But a spokeswoman for Russia's foreign ministry said it suggests, this is what Russia says, the U.S. is defending ISIS. We've heard that before. As Richard Roth reports, that brought a swift response from the United States.
A fierce and bitter war of words between the U.S. and Russia Saturday night at UN headquarters in New York. Russia had called for an emergency Security Council meeting. U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power, before she went into the session, said the U.S. regrets the loss of life, Syrian soldiers hit by a U.S. airstrike, but then blasted Moscow.
This said, even by Russia's standards, tonight's stunt, a stunt replete with moralism and grandstanding, is uniquely cynical and hypocritical.
Samantha Power spoke while the Russian ambassador was briefing the Security Council in close consultations. Quickly, the Russian ambassador, Vitaly Churkin, came to meet the media, outraged at what he had heard.
All my years in the United Nations, that is over 10 years, and all my years in international life, I've never seen, which is over 40 years, I've never seen such an extraordinary display of American heavy-handedness as we're witnessing today. As I was talking in the Security Council, sharing our analysis and frustration over the situation of Syria, Ambassador Power chose to talk to you.
Diplomats inside the meeting said the real show was outside before the cameras. Both the U.S. and Russian envoys seem to indicate an interest in keeping the humanitarian pause agreement in place, but there are bruised tensions.
And so why are we having this meeting tonight? It's a diversion from what is happening on the ground in Syria.
Frankly, I don't know what the next step is going to be or what the next move we can expect. Unfortunately, from what I heard Ambassador Power say as she walked into the room, this is not a very good omen.
Ambassador Churkin has quarreled with other U.S. ambassadors, though this appeared to be particularly edgy. The General Assembly annual debate begins Monday, and Syria is a major topic. Richard Roth, CNN, United Nations.
Well, let's go to the region now for a live report about this airstrike. And our Ben Wiedemann joining us live from Istanbul. He has been reporting extensively in this region and on this war. And certainly Samantha Power not mincing words there at the UN, and Russia showing its anger at the United States, Ben. But the good news we just heard from Richard Roth is it seems like both countries still supporting this cessation of hostilities. What are you learning there?
Yeah, it does appear that they do support it, but the cessation of hostilities that began on the 12th of September is looking very frail at the moment. In fact, I was in touch with Fred Pleitgen, our correspondent in Aleppo. He said overnight he heard lots of explosions. So the fighting seems to be still going on despite the rhetorical support for the ceasefire from both the United States and Russia. Now, according to this ceasefire agreement that was worked out between the two countries, what was supposed to happen is once the fighting stopped, humanitarian aid was to go into places like the opposition-controlled parts of Aleppo. After that, if that worked well, then the United States and Russia were supposed to set up a joint implementation center, which was intended to coordinate airstrikes by the Russians and the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, all of this seems to be up in the air at the moment following this incident that happened outside of Deir ez-Zor, and certainly that's not for lack of it desperately needed on the ground, but certainly if the United States and the Russians cannot agree on this ceasefire, then it doesn't look too good as far as the future goes. Natalie?
All right, thanks so much. Ben Wiedemann live for us there in Istanbul, Turkey.
62 people have been killed by U.S. airstrikes on the Syrian army, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense. RT's Paula Sleer has more details.
The Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed that US-led coalition planes attacked Syrian forces after entering Syrian airspace from the Iraqi border. We're hearing that there were 4 strikes, 62 Syrian soldiers were killed and 100 were injured. This position of the Syrian military was surrounded by Islamic State. So after the strikes, Islamic State militants were able to advance forward. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry is saying that even if this attack was carried out because of false coordinates, what it does show is the consequences of the United States' unwillingness to cooperate with Russia on locating targets and coordinating anti-terror efforts.
We believe that this incident took place due to the US's lack of intelligence in the surrounding area, but also because of the unwillingness of it to coordinate its counter-terrorist actions in Syria with Russia.
Now, there has also been a statement that has been issued by the U.S. Central Command. It says that it believed that this position that it struck was an Islamic State position that it had been tracking for quite some time, and that as soon as it was informed by the Russians and the Syrians that it was possible that it had hit Syrian personnel and Syrian military vehicles, it immediately suspended its operation.
Syria is a complex situation with various military forces and militias in close proximity, but coalition forces would not intentionally strike a known Syrian military unit. The coalition will review this strike and the circumstances surrounding it to see if any lessons can be learned.
At the same time, the Syrian army says that this is, to quote, a serious and blatant aggression against the army, and shows conclusively that the United States and its allies support Islamic State and other terrorist organizations.
The U.S. Army was previously accused of hitting Syrian troops in the same province back in December 2015.
The strategy that we are using now, airstrikes, special forces, and working with local forces who are fighting to regain control of their own country. That is how we'll achieve a more sustainable victory.
After the latest attack, Russia called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting behind closed doors. However, the UN ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, branded Russia's call, quote, cynical and hypocritical. RT News editor Igor Zhdanov has the details.
Of course, everybody was anticipating Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UNSC, and her Russian counterpart, Vitaly Churkin, to take podiums. And Samantha Power was the first one to, I would say, vent her anger publicly, to vent her outrage in front of the media. And when I say outrage, I'm not exaggerating, because she was furious about having to convene, about being summoned on Russia's call to discuss the airstrike. And this is something that she didn't really address in her speech properly. She kind of sidelined the whole airstrike thing. Let's actually have a listen as to what she had to say.
Russia decided to join the Assad regime, escalating the conflict, and perhaps worst of all, itself adopting some of the regime's worst practices, hitting hospitals, hitting refugee camps. And they're calling this emergency meeting? Really? Now, because of a single airstrike, a strike that, if it struck regime forces, did so in error, a strike that we have swiftly acknowledged and committed to investigating.
Vitaly Churkin took podium right after his American counterpart, and as he revealed that Samantha Power did not hold back on her hard feelings behind closed doors as well. In fact, by her approach, she managed to surprise even Vitaly Churkin. Let's have a listen to how he describes what happened behind closed doors.
As I was talking in the Security Council, sharing our analysis and frustration over the situation of Syria, Ambassador Power chose to talk to you. The only thing her deputy had to say in response to my comments was that the U.S. is investigating what has happened at Deir ez-Zor. As Ambassador Power walked in, first thing she said, she was not interested in what I had to say, because what I was saying is a stunt.
Well, so the Russians called this UN Security Council, this emergency UN Security Council, specifically to talk some things over. And this is what the UNSC is for some of the world's strongest powers to resolve the issues that emerged between them diplomatically. And this is exactly that didn't happen, the diplomatic conversation between Vitaly Churkin and Samantha Power. And it seems that they had a lot to discuss there because, well, first of all, according to Vitaly Churkin, the United States, if they carried out that airstrike, they violated two commitments that the United States had agreed on last week. That is, of course, not to attack the Syrian army, not to strike the Syrian army, and to commit to the ceasefire. Secondly, he pointed out the suspicious timing of the attack because, one, the Syrian army is stationed in Deir ez-Zor. The Deir ez-Zor, it's the region that's been hit by this airstrike. So it is kind of unusual of the United States military to assist the Syrian army because they're supporting, they're coordinating with the opposition. He even went as far as floating the idea that the American airstrike could be a provocation because, of course, the only side, and well, not the only, but one of the sides that is very happy with the airstrikes are Islamic State terrorists who are right now besieging the area. And also Vitaly Churkin highlights that the United States are not in control of the situation in Syria. And there have been a few troubling examples and that are proving this point. For example, one, the United States have been supporting the opposition. They've been training the opposition, and their trained rebels would eventually defect to the jihadists, taking American-supplied arms with them. And two, they've been working for months now on separating the so-called moderate opposition from the jihadis, like the al-Nusra Front, of course. And so far, they've been failing at this. So really a shame that the meeting didn't happen between Vitaly Churkin and Samantha Power. There's a lot to discuss. Well, hopefully on some other diplomatic levels, this won't really be an end to that very fragile cooperation established between the United States and Russia through the personal relationship of Sergei Lavrov, the Russian top diplomat, and, of course, John Kerry.
Russia and the US have been working to improve cooperation in Syria in the past few months. However, senior US politicians have repeatedly voiced their opposition to the moves.
I've said before that we believe Russia has the wrong strategy. Despite what the Russians say, we have not agreed to cooperate with Russia.
As you know, we are not coordinating on a military-to-military basis with the Russians. That has not changed.
However, Washington's strategy in Syria has repeatedly come under criticism over the years. There have been numerous accusations of supplies of American weapons ending up in the hands of radicals, with even the State Department admitting that this problem exists.
The reality of the situation in both Syria and in Iraq is that, equipment and various weaponry, while given to the quote-unquote good guys, sometimes ends up in the hands of the quote-unquote bad guys.
America's billion-dollar program to train Syrian rebels has also failed, with just a handful of fighters having actually received the training from US forces.
Can you tell us what the total number of trained fighters remains?
It's a small number, and the ones that are in the fight is we're talking four or five.
This 4 or 5 U.S. trained fighters. Let's not kid ourselves. That's a joke.